Welcome to today's episode, the Investor Empowerment Series radio show, episode number 26. This is actually an audio session recorded live at the IMN conference that we spoke about in episode number 25. The topic is lease to own, land contracts, contract for deeds, seller financing, and other non-traditional retail disposition strategies. And again, say that fast 10 times. So I wanted to bring this to you guys. I was the moderator, and as the moderator, I had the opportunity to actually grab a copy of the audio and put it on the podcast, which I think is awesome. So just to give a little background before, because it pretty much just jumps right into the recording with no introductions or anything. We've got myself and 4 additional people on the panel, which consist of Cortland, Plichta, the CEO of Homes Direct, Puneet, Singh, a managing partner at a law firm in California, Jack Bosch, the director of Orbit Investments out of Arizona, and Paul Turovsky, chief operating officer of TRAC Global. I believe they're based in Florida predominantly, or the Southeast somewhere. But this topic is basically covering alternative strategies on, leasing property, selling property, seller financing, things of that nature. I got asked to be the moderator of the panel due to my involvement with a portfolio of properties I own in Indianapolis that I acquired from the tax scavenger sale, which is essentially like buying the taxes like everyone does, or you've heard about people doing annually at the annual tax sale. After 3 years, or depending on the county and the state, it can vary, but after a number of years, and if those taxes are never actually purchased by an investor, then they go to something called the scavenger sale. And the scavenger sale is essentially like the leftover junk. People that know me will have no problem understanding this, but yes, I go to Indiana and I have bought the leftover junk. And normally those properties are purchased for somewhere between $2,000 and $7,000 a piece. And I then take those properties and I sell them to other investors on a seller finance type format, typically land contract on a 10-year note for a payment plan roughly of $350 to $600 per month. The cool thing about it is the investor gets a property, which all of these properties need work. Some of them are completely uninhabitable, no plumbing, no HVAC. It's all been torn out because they've been sitting vacant for so many years. But again, I recently had one of the investors I had sold a property via seller financing. It was a 6-unit commercial building with 2 retail spots on the bottom floor and then 4 apartments on top. Beautiful brick building. I think I sold it to him for about $30,000. On land contract, I bought it for $7,500. He fixed it up, did a lot of great work. Took him just over a year and a half or so, and then he actually refinanced it. And now he owns a property that he has in 100% habited and performing condition that he was able to acquire from me, essentially with a very low down payment, $2,500 or so. Made payments for that year and a half, and now he's got a great investment. So that's kind of my model, and that's how I ended up on this particular panel. If you have any questions about that, feel free to reach out to me. But again, this is some high caliber investors that are running firms that have anywhere from 300 to 500 homes in their portfolio. I believe one of the individuals has over 1,000 properties that he's currently managing. And we're basically discussing how they run their business, how they sell on lease option or on seller financing, some of the challenges they experience, pitfalls, benefits, etc. There is a period where you're going to have some Q&A closer to the end. Just wait for the answer on those. It's kind of hard to hear the audience member because they're not mic'd up. It's about 40 minutes of good stuff. So please enjoy. Again, Joe Mueller from the Investor Empowerment Series radio show. Talk to you soon.
Welcome to the Investor Empowerment Series radio show, empowering your real estate investing with techniques, opportunities, and information, minus the BS and sales pitches. Now, please welcome the host of the Investor Empowerment Series, Joe Mueller from the Tough as Nails Investment Syndicate. Joe Mueller.
So just to get started, can we hear a little bit more about the specifics of the markets you guys are investing in and the ROIs that you're receiving as a result of the investments, or like what you're seeing in the land space?
All right. Well, in the land space, market is really, really good right now. After several years of obviously a lot of people staying away from land, especially, the smaller builders and the private people, which is our main market. So I don't sell necessarily to large builders. I don't sell to our spaces that below $100,000 pieces of land. We're seeing a tremendous upside right now in terms of demand, and more cash buyers are showing up than have. We talked about that a second. I was about to agree with you on that or with somebody who I talked to, that we're seeing a lot more cash buyers, but still continuing to sell a lot of properties on seller financing, which just makes it much more affordable because the banks and traditional finance institutions don't like to lend on land. So overall, therefore, the land contract and these more alternative methods are a great way to dispose of land. And that continues to work very well right now. As a matter of fact, right now prices are up and demand is there. So we're very excited about it.
Before we move on, can you just talk a little bit more about how you structure one of those contracts for your land deals?
Yeah, so I use a land contract basically that it makes also, in our case, it's agreement between the buyer and us. We even do that outside. It might be the oddball here, I know, but I do that even without a title company because it's just one document that needs to be signed. And we are asking typically for anywhere between a 10 and 20% down payment, and then stretch out the monthly payments based on kind of like sliding scale. The more they owe, the longer we finance it for, in order to keep the payments affordable for people. And the less they owe, the shorter we finance it for, to keep the payments at least at a certain amount of level. Now, land contracts for that work in the state of Arizona very, very well because it has in the state statutes that you can foreclose on them based on the amount of equity they've built up. And if they don't have much equity built up, you can do the forfeiture process within 30 days. Costs you like $50 and you're done. So it's great for that. New Mexico is great for that. In other states, we now prefer using lease options because you can use a land contract pretty much everywhere, but as far as I know at least, and I think Texas has put some rules in there that you might not be able to use it. But other than that, the issue is they accept it, but the foreclosure process, they still force you to a judicial foreclosure, which at a piece of property that's only worth $10,000 is not really a good solution. At a $100,000 property, I'd be happy to do that. So we're using for our cheap properties more and more lease options that allow us to do that foreclosure process, turn that basically into an eviction, which on a piece of land is not so hard.
Great, thank you. Cortland, what about you as far as your market and return on investment?
Before I jump into it, the other states as well in the Midwest, you can do forfeitures as well. Ohio, Indiana, Michigan, and some other states have laws as well that pertain to land contracts that allow you to have a more expedited way of eviction process rather than having to go through a full foreclosure like you would if it was a full deed of trust. So those are other states that land contracts still work pretty well in. Things we're seeing in the marketplace, I think we're still seeing that inventory has been tight. So trying to find deals in the last 12 months have been harder to find. What we're finding is with our inventory, a lot of our assets were purchased in the last 4 to 6 years, and we're starting to see now that some of our lease purchase occupants are now starting to exercise their options as they've seen prices and values increase. They've now have equity built into their properties as some values have gone up above what our lease option prices were. So we're now actually starting to see some of that take hold, and we hope that in the next 12 to 18 months, even though interest rates might still continue to rise, we're expecting lending to still continue to become easier and a little bit more liquid, and expect to have more of our older tenants exercise their options as well.
Thank you.
I can tell you what some of our clients are facing in California.
Sure.
Inventory is also really tight in California. The rental costs are skyrocketing right now, and because of that, there's a huge push for enacting rent control and just cause ordinances that make it difficult for you to, number one, increase rents, and then also to terminate the tenancy of the tenant unless you have cause. And so in this past election, Mountain View and Richmond enacted these types of ordinances. So we've got, just in Northern California alone, 13 ordinances that impose additional obligations on a landlord or an owner before they can terminate a tenancy. With regards to lease-to-own contracts, not many of our clients are doing that right now, especially the single-family rental owners. We don't see much of that. If someone is considering entering into one of these types of agreements or arrangements, Certainly there's risk involved, and like I was discussing with you earlier, you want to make sure that you're working with a well-drafted agreement. In California, we recommend the CAR agreement, which was the California Association of Realtors agreement. The lease agreement, the option agreement, and their purchase agreement is well-drafted. And when we do see these in our office, it's because an owner put together a very vague agreement, and now we're in litigation for years, and the attorney fees and costs are pretty high in those types of situations where we're arguing over, evictions and a quiet title action that's filed at the same time. So kind of what we're seeing.
It seems like the inventory is rather short everywhere you look, whether you're in Florida or you're in Texas or anywhere else. It's relatively tight. With us, we're in South Florida. We primarily focus on Southwest and Northwest Florida. We've actually created something a little bit different with our portfolio, where the individuals, instead of doing one contract or two contracts, we actually divide it into three. We have a lease contract, a purchase agreement, and an unsigned purchase agreement and an option agreement. What that allows us to do is to have actual consideration for the option and not an assigned purchase agreement that entitles the person to pursue the particular property. So it definitely makes it a little bit easier to proceed forward with eviction if you actually wanted to go that particular route.
That's a great point. So based on the fact, it seemed like everybody mentioned the difficulties finding new opportunities. How are you guys sourcing your acquisitions at this point?
Well, for our land, we use direct mail. Mm-hmm. For my rental portfolio, I work with partners in different markets that I, over years, learned to trust, and they still go to the auctions. And as a result, I'm not getting that many houses, not as many as I want to, but we're still buying probably one or two a month or so.
Great.
We still continue to buy assets through some of the auction houses, Hudson and Marshall, Auction.com, Hubzu, a lot of the familiar places. We also still continue to buy on spreadsheets, bank foreclosed properties. We'll always look at the MLS, never really find much. So we still continue to go through typically just a lot more due diligence, a lot more time to find assets, as we're not finding them as plentiful as we were 2 to 4 years ago.
Great.
And I'm probably not equipped to answer this one. So
Sure. With us, we look at REOs, of course, the short sales, distressed assets, portfolios. I'm on MLS every single day, whether it's a short sale, I make an offer right away. At any point in time, we usually have about 100 short sale offers on the market. And then in addition, obviously, wholesalers and flippers and individuals who are just getting rid of the properties. So we're everywhere that we could possibly get the properties at.
I know my firm's changed a little bit the last year by also, like Jack, offering direct mail, utilizing somewhere between 5,000 and 7,000 pieces per month on average right now that we're putting out to mainly just the Illinois area where we're based, but that's created a new influx of source for us. So even if it's an opportunity that I might not personally want to be involved in, I might be able to pass that deal along to another investor. That said, can we talk a little bit more about the typical customer and the collateral you guys are seeing with these either the land contract or lease option? Sure, whoever wants to jump in.
Sure. With us, a typical individual is an individual who is making anywhere from $40,000 to $80,000 a year. Unfortunately, is not able to qualify for a conventional mortgage, maybe because they had a previous bankruptcy or foreclosure, or is moving to a different state. So that particular individual does come to us. We do require a 10% deposit to 12% deposit on the purchase of the property, depending upon our inventory. If we have more inventory in that particular area, we lower our deposit requirement to 10%. Which on a $200,000 property is $20,000. So the individual does have to have a particular amount of money saved up in order to meet our criteria.
Yeah.
And that's similar to what our clients work with too. Someone who doesn't have enough money for a down payment or has bad credit. And we advise our clients that you're working with someone that you're taking a risk on someone that the bank wouldn't even take a risk on. So again, you want to make sure that you have an airtight agreement in that situation.
I'd consider our clients pretty high risk, being in the asset value that we typically work in. Average credit score is probably in the mid-5s. Down payment, option fee, what we typically take would be anywhere averaging around $2,000 on an asset. It's pretty low, but considering the price of the property, we're not commanding the higher dollar values.
Still roughly 10%?
Yeah.
Still 10%, right?
Yes.
Okay.
On the housing side, we're very similar than he is. We're asking for about a $2,000 to $3,000 deposit on a lease option. Putting the option exercise price fairly high, clearly above market right now, because I really don't want to sell these properties, but it makes property management a little easier. The typical characteristic is like somebody in the mid 500s, and so credit score, solid jobs. We check out background checks and those kind of things. So, and on the land side, obviously, it's a little different. We allow 10% perhaps down payments is decent. We don't actually even check credit there because of the foreclosure rules. It's fairly easy, and because the purchase price is very low that we get them for. But we on land, because the banks are not even an option, it allows us to actually charge a substantially higher interest rate, which makes the deal work again.
Okay.
On background checks, we do run credit just to know what the score is, but more importantly, we're always looking at what's in collections. We want to know who's calling them more than we are. And we like to know utilities. Do they pay their utilities on time? Because a lot of times in some states, especially up in the Midwest, you got to be careful because water and utilities can become a property lien against the property. So while you only think they might be owing you in back rent, a year later, you get to find out that there's hundreds to thousands of dollars of unpaid water bills that now become the responsibility of the owner. So a lot of times we look at utilities as an indicator, as well as a lot of our tenants that change cell phones a lot. So if we're looking at they can't keep communication channels open, then that's a red flag as well.
Okay. Regarding the seller financed documentation or the land contracts, the way they're written up, how are you guys facilitating the ownership of the property? So who actually owns the property and who's controlling the property is the question. Is it?
With our group, we do, and we own the property from day one until they purchase the property from us. That's why, as I mentioned earlier, we have 3 different agreements: the lease agreement, the option agreement, and then the purchase agreement. Until they actually purchase the property, they will not own that home.
And that's what we would recommend to our clients as well in California.
Yes. Now, in our case, depending on which state we're operating in and which document we use. If we operate in Arizona, we use a land contract and we record it. So that means that the county will list the buyer of the property as a co-owner with us. And therefore, if they need to go get a building permit or something like that, and they want to build a house on their own dime, they can. If we go into other states, then we operate more under the scenario you just described. And yes, hope that explains.
We're the same way. Our investors stay, all the ownership and deeds stay in the name of the investors until they either exercise their option, or if it's a land contract, their balance is paid off to zero. On the lease purchases, it does sometimes become an issue when they want to do renovations to their property, do any additions to it because the deed is not in their name. Sometimes they can't pull the permits. They can't pull the permits as a owner-occupied. They'd have to hire a licensed contractor to pull the permits. So sometimes that becomes an issue that we have to work out.
If they take a loan to build something, usually then it becomes a non-issue, because in that case the bank will not subordinate to our land contract anyway. So they will be going and cashing us out of the transaction, which is not a bad situation either. Just to add to that.
Okay.
How about Dodd-Frank? Has that affected your businesses at all in the last couple of years?
Not with us, because we don't do seller financing.
Not with us either, because land is outside of Dodd-Frank. And the improved property and houses and apartments, we don't do seller financing. Understood?
It has for us. We don't generate the land contracts anymore. We do a lot of lease purchases. It'd be interesting to see. I think we just had at lunch, we were talking about the Dodd-Frank Act, and see what the administration is going to do with any type of repeal process. I think it's wishful thinking, but I guess we can only hope that they'll repeal some of the overreaching statements they have in there.
And we were working a lot with Dodd-Frank too, and we were doing a lot of post-foreclosure evictions, but that side of our business has died down, and we're focusing more on the property management side, so it doesn't come up as much.
Okay. I know on my side of the business, when we're dealing on the land contract side in this Indianapolis market that I'm in, we're selling mainly to investors, so it doesn't apply. But I know that there's some other investors that have made that part of their main focus of buying, the tax lien or the scavenger sale type properties and selling to owner occupants. And I believe it's three 3 freebies a year is what I'm told if you're going to sell to an owner-occupant on seller financing. So just a note for the audience on that. So do you guys have any challenges with insuring the properties as far as property insurance or, keeping the borrower, is the borrower getting insured? How does that work on your end?
No, on the rental house property, we insure them every single property. This is not a problem. You just need to pick different insurance based on whether it's vacant and you're still rehabbing it, or if it's rented, it's different types of insurance. Just need to keep track of that and update the insurance. On the land side, what we're having there is, instead of a individual insurance for every property, we got a commercial blanket insurance on all our properties, and the insurance company just asked us to submit a list of properties that we own every so often, and then they cover it. So that's fairly inexpensive and works very well for us.
Is the borrower required to be insured in your contract the way you run it?
No, the way we're in things, they're not, but that's a good idea. I probably should add that.
Anyone else?
With us, we mandate that the tenant actually does get property insurance and renter's insurance as well. We also enforce it in the actual payment. So we have a rental payment, and in addition, immediately there's an added insurance payment. So that insurance payment does go towards their insurance.
And we inform clients as well that it's okay to ask your tenants for renter's insurance, but be careful not to require them to use a particular insurance company, because then you may be acting like an insurance broker.
Years ago, we used to have it in the contract that they'd have to provide their own insurance. Biggest issue we found is that at closing, they would provide us the insurance binder, but then 3 months later, because we were listed as a lost payee, we come and get the cancellation notice. And then begins the barrage of emails, phone calls, letters, asking them to reinstate their insurance to find out that they never do. So over the years, we started enacting people who are already in place. We'd force place it. We had already written in our contract that we were allowed to force place insurance on them. So we had to do that for our current already occupied properties. And then about a year ago, we'd started automatically including it into their payment. We use REO Guard, and there's just a number. I don't particularly like them, so I'm not validating them. I use them, but there's a bunch of other companies who are here, and it's been quite a big space that it seems over the past couple of years there's been a bunch of insurance providers that can offer bulk insurance coverage, and they'll do line item, whether it's RC coverage or if you want to do a lesser ARV coverage. There's a lot of good products out there that allow you to do month-to-month coverage, and you can drop coverage at any time, add it on. You can get liability. You don't have to get full hazard and liability, so that's always a nice option. If your investors are wanting to just have liability while the property sits vacant, it can help increase their return if you're having a long period of time where it's not occupied. But what we find is you can't trust these tenants with anything, so if you're better off being in more control, telling them what they need, because they're not going to do it on their own.
Thank you. Okay. Who handles the property? Question. Go ahead.
For those of you in the lease option space, 2 questions. One, you just talked about how tenants get a lot of management. The idea is that you're totally outsourcing all property management to them. Realistically, what percentage of property management do you still have to do? And 2, what percentage of your tenants on the lease option actually exercise the option to purchase a property?
With us, it's 33%. Out of our portfolio right now this year we did about 50 actual complete closings. I would say with us as well, the maintenance, the properties as is, how is, where is, how it stands, how it lays. So if the roof collapses, it's the responsibility of the tenant to do all the maintenance on the property.
The papers say that, but how much if it collapses, do they actually do it?
They have to. If they don't, then we can proceed with the eviction.
We started off in that realm where they have to be responsible for everything, and on paper it sounds wonderful. What we find is most of these people can make their payments on time, but they get 1 or 2 hiccups, whether they're sick from work for a week or 2 or a water heater goes out, and most don't even have checking accounts or savings accounts. So while yes, they are responsible for doing the maintenance, we'll sometimes step in and handle critical maintenance for them, and then we have in our contract we can add those extra repairs onto the back of the loan or add it in. So a lot of times we'll try and do that, because what we find is We don't really care if there's a hole in the wall or if the carpet is dingy, but if they can't repair that roof, while it's their responsibility to repair it, the problem is if we have to come and evict them 6 months later, a lot of times we found out over time that they never repaired that small leak. It turned into a big leak. We evict them, and now it becomes our problem. So a lot of times we'll try and assist them on what we consider critical maintenance on the property, things that preserve the asset. So we try not to get into the weeds when it comes to it, doing every little thing. But if it's going to preserve that asset, we'll step in.
And we recommend the same to our clients, is that they maintain responsibility for the larger repairs, and the smaller, more routine ones the tenant can handle, because the owner still has title to the property, and if there's a defective repair, it can become worse. And so you want to be in control of any large repairs at your property.
We had that conversation with our property manager in Cleveland, who basically says legally, because it's a lease, they can't really deny a claim by the tenant. Now, kind of like between the lines, they're pushing back a little bit on simple things, and it's the understanding of this tenant that they take care of smaller things. But yeah, if the roof caves in or if something major happens, we understand they don't have the money for it, so we'll just go fix it, and then we'll tag it on later on or something like that. It's just, but it does save on the rehab side. So the way we buy our properties, if we draw contacts over there, if they buy it at auction, we work together on rehabbing them. And because it's a lease option situation, we don't end up having to rehab them to the level that we would otherwise. So we don't have to paint them on the inside. We don't have to replace or smoothen out every patch or every little smudge on the hardwood floors or anything like that. So it probably saves us a few $1,000s on the rehab cost to be able to go sell them with lease options. And although the properties look good, I mean, we don't lease them as junk. I mean, they look really good. We make sure we put in new roofs, we put in things, we put in the windows if necessary. But the smaller stuff just doesn't have to be made. As a matter of fact, it becomes a selling argument often.
And with us, we also offer an additional warranty. So if a client doesn't want to maintain the particular property, they'll purchase that particular warranty. And if there's any issues with the particular home, our engineers will go out there and get that particular issue fixed. The warranty is passed to a third-party company, so it makes it easy. There is a fee to go out there of about $70 to $90. And that works for anything, including appliances, heaters, windows, doors, anything that goes wrong with the property. Obviously, the third-party warranty company would cover and take care of.
Great. I know in our situation, these. Oh, go ahead. Do you have a follow-up to it?
People as well. How many of the lease options actually convert to a purchase?
Well, in my case, not many at all on the house side, and I don't want that. I mean, if we set. In the markets where we're in, there's very little appreciation, or in the Cleveland market, there's actually happening in the places where I am. There's some appreciation happening, so it's likely that there will be some exercises, but it's probably going to be still a few years away, because we do set them up at a bit higher than current market. So I don't expect any to happen in the next 3 years, but if they happen, then that's okay. Because then it's a win-win for everyone. But in our case, not many. And on the land side, the goal is we're using the lease option as a replacement for the land contract, so that it is actually in essence a contract that they pay off, and that where we give them a lease credit every single month towards the amount that they owe, and then over 10 years they pay this off, and then the goal is that they go off. Now, in this case, on the lease options that we've done, the payoff rate is 90%. So almost everyone pays their things off and then gets a deed to the property. And that's the way we want it, because on the land side we want to sell, on the house side we want to rent.
With us, we maintain the 33% rule, 33% due complete, 33% go for a second year. For the second year, we renegotiate. The price goes up, the rent goes up as well. They don't receive any credits back. And then 33% do vacate the particular properties.
And I couldn't answer that for you, because they come to us when they want to evict the occupant. So we do about 4,000 evictions a month, but they're not particularly with regards to lease-to-own contracts.
And to add with us, we also control. If we want to close more individuals, then we obviously do everything in our power to close more. Sometimes it's not beneficial to close certain individuals because the property has increased in value, or you know you could get more for it, so you would rather have them extend for a second year.
With our land contracts, we actually sell the notes off after. We'll start beginning to sell them after 16 to 18 months of seasoning. So a lot of times we never see what the end game is for our occupants. With our lease purchases, most of those are just starting to get to, our oldest ones are probably about 3 years now, and I'm probably less than 10% have executed. What we find a lot is some people that buy our properties, I'd say the majority of people that have cashed out bought the property with being in some type of waiting for a lawsuit or a settlement, and they were buying our house and then waiting for the settlement to hit and then paying us off. And a lot of times we'd give like a cash reduction on the property if they'd pay us out early. It's more of just a coincidence, I guess. They just kind of knew something was coming up in the next 8 months with the settlement. It's kind of an odd quirk.
So in my situation, it's more of a 20 to 30% transition rate as well, but it's a little bit different of what the product that we offer is, because we're actually selling these properties as like a shell. And a lot of the times they're unoccupiable, they're uninhabitable, they're condemned by the city. So majority of the clientele being the investor coming in, sometimes their down payment equals 50% of the purchase price that I got it for, which is great for us, but we don't insure the property. It's all on that end, land contract buyer on our side. I got a question for Puneet. Mm-hmm. What are some of the challenges on the legal side we can talk about with, the land contract and going through that foreclosure potential process, or failing to, allowing a tenant to maybe exercise an option for some reason?
What we see mostly in California is, and in California, as I'm sure many of you are aware, it's a very, very tenant-friendly state, and most contracts are construed in favor of the tenant versus the landlord. When it comes to evictions in general and post-foreclosure evictions, you're removing someone from their home, and so the courts are very, very strict on how they construe our paperwork. So that you have to serve the right notice. You have to not only choose the right notice, you have to serve the right notice. And in California, we've got a lot of legal aid defense groups, as you were mentioning, you have in Florida, that will request jury demands and file all kinds of motions, because when you file an eviction in California, a notice gets sent to the resident letting them know, hey, guess what? You're being evicted. Here's all the organizations that can help you for free. And then they run to them, and then they file jury demands, and clients shocked when they hear from us that an eviction can cost up to $10,000 to $20,000 if there's a jury trial. So you want to make sure you have all your I's dotted and your T's crossed. When it comes to lease-to-own purchase agreements, again, like I'd mentioned before, what we're seeing are agreements that are very, very poorly drafted, very vague, where the owner and the tenant, basically decide that they're going to agree to the terms on a future date. That's why it's a good idea to have that purchase agreement attached, so that there's no confusion as to what those terms are going to be. And another thing that we're seeing specifically in California is that there's been a lot of court consolidations. The hours have been cut back, so a typical eviction that may take 4 weeks is now taking 6 weeks if it's uncontested, and then 6 to 9 weeks if it's contested. However, if you were evicting me, it would take you about a year, because I know all the right strings to pull.
We only have a few minutes left here, so now we can take some additional questions. Did you still have a question, sir? Go ahead.
On your, let's say a property's got a little bit soft, do you have inspections set up to right inspect the property, or do you inspect the property to make sure that it happens?
Yes, we do inspect the property every 3 to 6 months.
We have the right to inspect. We'll get inspections upon first time we acquire the property, and then anytime a tenant moves out. If they request us to look at the property, a lot of times we'll first have them send us photos themselves, since almost everyone has camera phones now, send us initial photos of the issue, and then from there we just determine if we need to send out a qualified contractor to do a more thorough inspection. And on that same note, a lot of times when we do repairs, we also hire third-party inspectors to inspect our contractors' work, especially on roofs. So many states don't require proper licensing for contractors, and you get a lot of fly-by-night type contractors. So a lot of times in our contractor side contracts will require that third-party inspections be made before we release final payment. That helps us handle doing renovations 5 states away when we're not able to send our guys on the ground to go do it for us.
Very similar on our rental properties. We have them inspected 1 to 2 times a year, depending on which market we're in, and the property manager does that for us. And then obviously, there's no inspections on the land necessary, but there's really not much that needs to be done there.
And in California, general inspections are prohibited. You can only enter a tenant's unit for specified reasons that are listed in the Civil Code, one being to make necessary agreed-upon repairs or to exhibit the property to contractors or something like that. So then you would have a reason to enter.
Sir?
Yeah, I was just going to follow up on Ms. Singh's comments. She's smart attorney and saying in California every time. So for any investors in here that are looking at these alternative investment models, please make sure you're talking to a local attorney. Also, every single state has different title standards, has different underwriting guidelines, has different tenant laws, has different eviction and foreclosure processes, which do affect, as Cortland said, Cortland's getting a 10% rate, and some of these guys in other states are getting much higher. A lot of that is due to regulations and laws in each state and how everything is done. So I was just going to point out for anybody that's looking at this type of thing before that going state by state and talking to a local lender is probably a good idea to figure out if it's a better investment model in one place than another, because the laws are different in every single state in regards to how compliance is.
Absolutely. The first thing we do in every state, we go into, whether it's land or houses, we have a state-specific contract for that state to make sure that, and I wouldn't ever go into California for my and so just...
We've had a lot of people tell us that during this conference, that they're leaving California.
But just as yes, absolutely. Definitely, every state is completely different. In the land side, I've these in 17 states, so it's tremendous the differences that exist from state to state.
Sure. Thank you, sir. Yeah, go ahead, sir.
So, Cortland, you had mentioned that you resell or seller finance notes.
Yes, correct.
Right, and two questions. One main question is, do you create them for that purpose? And is that your business model?
Yes, it is our business model.
And two, I think I might just move to California for free. What kind of discount will you take on that? And is it half your season, 12 months?
No, it doesn't. Most investors prefer seasoning, and the 12 to 18 month is where most investors want the minimums to be. So the longer the better when it comes to seasoning.
But that's also considering that your credit score of your buyers is
so low. Correct. We're not dealing with 700 credit scores, so history is the only thing that's relevant with my type of customers. As far as discount goes, it's anywhere from 55 to 65 cents discount on the unpaid principal balance. It is, but we buy them cheap, so it's all on the buy.
Go ahead, sir.
I have a question for Puneet. Even if you're using the correct CAR forms, making the lease option very clear, I've heard some stories about tenants here getting a lot of illegal aliens and say, well, these people tricked me. How many of these, even when the correct paperwork is done very well, you see going to litigation with the tenant saying, no, this is my house, or
Yeah, and that's why, in our firm, we generally don't recommend that our clients do lease-to-own contracts just because there's so many complications that can arise. And so typically what will happen is we're doing an eviction, and then they go file a quiet title action, even if it has no merit, and then the opposing attorney will file what's called a motion for consolidation, and they'll consolidate the two matters, and it can drag on forever. And that's what we've typically seen in any of the lease-to-own contract cases that's why they've come to us, because there's a dispute over it. But again, if you use the car agreement, for example, you have a better chance of getting out of that lawsuit a lot quicker.
Okay, we got time for one more question. If there's anything else. All right. Special thanks to the panel today, and thanks to the audience for coming. Appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to another episode of the Investor Empowerment Series radio show. Be sure to tune in next week for another empowering episode. We welcome your feedback, so please rate us on iTunes and Stitcher, and visit us at www.investoремpowermentchicago.com or TANISGroupRealty.com.